Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to learn how to use a fuel pressure test gauge. So the vehicle that we're going to be using today is a 1999 Jeep Cherokee. This is just a good overall vehicle to be able to show you guys how to do a fuel pressure test on. So what we're going to start off with is we're going to need a fuel line disconnect tool kit. You can usually pick this up in any type of regular automotive parts stores. This one is just from Napa, so it's just a Napa service tool kit. It's a pretty great kit, and I'd recommend it for anybody that's going to be getting into this and working on some cars. You can also look at Harbor Freight and things along those lines. They have some great products as well for that. Then we have a master fuel pressure test kit. So this has a bunch of attachments. It has some other valving to set up different ways for doing inline testing, and then we also have our test gauge. You just want to make sure that the test gauge that you guys get is one that will work for the fuel pressure that you're going to be trying to test for. So this gauge goes up to 150 psi. The range that we're looking at for this vehicle is right around 50 psi. So you just want to make sure that you're doing that. There are some that have far less and more depending on what type of vehicle that you're working with. So over at the vehicle, this is just a Jeep inline 6-cylinder, and it does have the fuel test port for us to be able to kind of go through and look and use the test equipment. So right here there's a little test port, which people tend to call a Schrader valve, and it's very similar to almost like a tire valve. They come in a couple different sizes. So just to kind of access a little easier, I'm just going to take this upper PZV breather hose off, and I'm just going to make it so that I kind of get in here a little bit better. So this is our fuel line that comes in from the tank, and that's going to go down our fuel rail, and that goes to the injectors. So this piece right here, this is our pressure port. So if you look on the inside of it, it's got a little valve that has to be depressed in order to get pressure readings off of this. Typically there's a cap on here. This vehicle doesn't have one. Most vehicles are going to have a test port like this, or you're going to have to disconnect the fuel line here and put the tester in line with it. We'll do both of those today just so you can see how both of those work. So what we'll be using for this, for the test port, is a test line, and what happens is this goes through, if you can kind of see on the inside of it, it's got a threaded area, and then there's a rubber seal inside, and then inside of there there's a little piece that will push the valve inside here so that it'll allow for the fuel to come through. So you just want to make sure that you can spin this thing on pretty easily. You should be able to just tighten it down by hand and make sure it doesn't have any leaks. And then what we'll do is we'll set up our test gauge onto that end. This is our test gauge that we're going to use. So on this left hand side where my thumb is, this is just a pressure relief. So when you need to either take a fuel sample, it'll come off this clear line and you can put it into a container, or if you're just trying to disconnect the tool, you can relieve the pressure there. And then there's just a quick disconnect fitting here, and all I'm going to do is make sure that I plug that quick connect fitting in line with my new test feature. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to crank this vehicle over, and I'm going to see what the pressure is. So some vehicles may have a running pressure. Some vehicles may have a pressure that is when the key's on, engine's off. In this vehicle, what they specify is for the engine running, it should be 49 psi plus or minus 5 psi. So what we'll do is we'll crank this over and see what happens. Okay, so with the vehicle running, you can see that the fuel pressure itself is right about 38 psi, which is less than what is recommended, so it's outside of that threshold. And what we'll do now too is we'll just do a key off test to see what the fuel pressure does. So typically the fuel pressure should stay steady for about 5 to 10 minutes or so and slowly drop off. But I just want to watch this gauge and see what it does right when we turn the key off. So hopefully you notice with that the fuel pressure just dropped directly down to 0 once the vehicle was turned off. Usually what that means is that there's a bad check valve within the fuel pump or the fuel pressure regulator that's allowing for the fuel to drop back down. So in order to disconnect this tool, all you really need to do is push this pressure relief valve. If I push that, I should have a little bit of fuel, if there was any in here, to come out, and that will relieve any pressure on the line so that you can disconnect the tool. And then what we'll do is we'll do the next style of fuel pressure test. All right, so to do the other style of test, which is what they call a T-in style, what I need to do is remove this fuel line from the fuel rail. So there's a little safety catch here that if you stake in with a flat blade screwdriver, you can usually get this to come off. And all that's doing is that's being like a redundancy to allow the fuel line to stay in place. Next, what you'll need is a fuel line disconnect tool. And what this is used for is to relieve a couple tabs that are inside this connector to get it off the fuel rail. So this will just go right around the fuel rail itself, and then you push in on it. And what should happen is it should, if you get both sides in equally, it should relieve a couple of tabs that are grabbing onto, there's a little raised ridge here. There's a couple tabs in there, pushes those tabs down so that you can pull this line right off. And then what we'll do is we'll do a T-in, where we're going to take an adapter that will go in to the fuel rail and one that will go into the fuel line. So this adapter will go in here, and this one is on this end. And what we're able to do is connect this in line with it. So this has two pieces here and one on the bottom, so what it will allow us to do is just connect directly into the same circuit. So we can do two different style of tests on this one piece, where we can do what they call a pump deadhead test, where this line coming straight off of the pump, we can hook into this side of this apparatus. And what we'll do, here, I'll do this side, and what it would allow us to do is take the fuel pressure and run the fuel pressure straight up through here and into the gauge, so we can see what the actual output of the pressure from the pump is, so we can see if there was like any leaking fuel injectors or things along those lines. And we can also take this end and put this in here and just make it in series, so we can see what the fuel pressure is while it's in series. All right, so now that we have this connected in series, so I have the fuel line from the vehicle coming up, goes into this valve, and it has a little shut off on here on the back side that I can allow for the fuel, if I open that, to go all the way back into the rail to run the vehicle, or I can shut this off, and then what I can do is I can do a deadhead test on the pump to see what's actually going on with the pump, or if it may be something with the injectors. So all I got to do now is just connect my fuel pressure gauge. Just make sure you run the lines so that they're not going to run into a fan or anything along those lines, and then we'll take our gauge and we'll see what our readings are again. All right, so with the vehicle running, you can see that the pressure is slowly coming up. It's not really where it needs to be. Again, it's right there around that 38 psi. And then what I can do is I can actually come through, and if I shut off this valve and I do what they call a deadhead test, I can see what the actual pump output is. So if I turn that on there with the vehicle running, it's slowly going to run out of fuel, but that pump should be pumping more than 38 psi. We should be doing 50 or more, especially on a deadhead test like that. So you can see with that, the pressure dropped right off, right when the car turned off, where that pressure should have stayed up because of the pressure check valve that's inside the fuel pump. So like with this vehicle, you know, their running concern and whatnot is actually going to be the fuel pump, because it has low fuel pressure, and also it has a really long, what they call extended crank, because of the fact that the fuel is taking a long time to come from the tank and get pumped all the way up to the engine. So this is going to need a fuel pump. Well, that's it for a fuel pressure test. Hope this video was helpful. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys real soon.